Troublesome Trucks, based on the story of the same name from the Railway series but James the Red Engine, is the 9th episode of the first series of Thomas the Tank Engine, and it's the continuation of James's story arc in the first series. It has been several days since James damaged one of his coaches, and since then has been shut up in the shed as punishment, being left alone and not even allowed to shunt. James begins to cry, thinking that no one will ever see his red paint again, but the Fat Controller finally returns, telling James that he hopes he will be a better engine as his actions have caused a lot of trouble for the railway. James sincerely apologises and promises to behave. The Fat Controller accepts his apology and assigns him to pull some trucks. James is delighted to be let out and eagerly goes to work. At the station, Thomas brings James's trucks and teases him about the bootlaces before leaving, much to his annoyance. James couples himself up to the trucks, who tease him for his red paint. James just ignores them and, despite their protests, firmly sets off with them. During the journey, the trucks make several attempts to hold James back, but each time his crew manages to correct the problems, and then he continues on. The trucks then begin shouting at James to give up, but it is no use as James is determined to prove himself a better engine. Finally, the train reaches Gordon's Hill, and James tries to pull the trucks up as fast as he can, which is initially tricky. Then halfway up, the pulling suddenly gets easier, but his driver stops him and points out that the brake van and the last 4 trucks have broken away and are running back down the hill due to a snapped coupling. Fortunately, the guard manages to bring them to a stop at the bottom and gets out to warn approaching engines. James rushes downhill to retrieve the end of his train, while Edward has just been stopped behind it. He offers to help, but James politely declines, determined to do it himself. Edward obliges and encourages James as he makes his way up the hill. Pulling with every ounce of his strength, James finally reaches the top of the hill and safely continues to his designated station. Later, as James rests, Edward arrives with the Fat Controller. James is very worried, thinking that the Fat Controller will be cross with him again. This time, however, the Fat Controller is happy with James, having seen everything from on board Edward's train. Since James has managed to make the trucks behave, the Fat Controller allows him to keep his red paint. This episode continues James's arc in the first series, and it shows another part of his personality, his determination. Since his mishaps in the previous episode, he's determined to prove himself a worthy and useful engine to the Fat Controller, and we get to see the Troublesome Trucks in action again, as this time they do something different from trying to derail an engine or push him down a hill. They instead try to convince James to give up and try and say that he can't pull them, but to no avail. It just shows another side of the trucks' personality, as they often use words rather than actions to bring an engine down and play tricks on them. This was proven with their insult to James about his red paint.
Oh, said the trucks. We want a proper engine, not a red monster.
This was the introduction to James's triumphant theme, as it's been dubbed by many of the fans, and I love every second of it. It just starts off as James's regular theme, and then in the end it shows into something that shows James's determination. And that's what good music should do. It should show the emotions the characters are going through. And every time I listen to it, it just sounds like the definition of determination. It's a musical track that I love to listen to every time I watch this episode. Troublesome Trucks was the first Series 1 episode I ever saw on VHS, since I owned the VHS tape Troublesome Trucks and Other Stories, and it's an episode that I always look forward to re-watching again whenever I put the DVD on. And this was the start of James's road to redemption, to being the useful engine that he is today, and we see more of it in the upcoming episode, which you'll see tomorrow.